Welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss dynasty strategy, rankings, and all things NFL. So get ready to geek out on fantasy football with your host, Rich Dotson.
Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds Podcast, Injury Show edition. I know you normally don't hear me, but Rich is off in Vegas, living it up. And so I'm filling in. I'm your host, Garrett Price, here with my good friend, mentor, co-host, best-looking guy on the show, Matt O'Hare. How's it going, buddy?
Wow, after that intro, I'm doing great, man. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought I'd spice it up today. Add a lot of superlatives.
Absolutely. Feel very superlatized.
So week 4, interesting week. Tight ends still apparently don't matter. And there's some good things, some bad things. It was an interesting week. We've got the doubleheader Monday games tonight. So if you're listening to this and we haven't talked any Titans or Dolphins or anything like that, that's why doubleheader tonight, which I personally love the Monday night doubleheaders. I think they're fantastic. So I always look forward to that. But we have a couple big names that we got to go through, but not a huge number of injuries overall. Wouldn't you say so, Matt?
Yeah, no, the injuries have been down the past couple weeks from the first 2 weeks, which I think is normal. Guys are starting to get used to it a little bit more. The speed of the game, the full speed of the game, actually, because no one plays in the preseason. So I think this is starting to be this should be the normal amount, right? From week in and week out, there'll be some aberrations.
Fingers crossed.
Even less or even more, but this should be pretty much the norm going forward. And for Rich, I'm sure right now he's just drowning his sorrows after spending all that money going out to Vegas and having to watch that complete crap show of a game.
Oh, man. The hard part is I was talking with my brother-in-law about it, and Deshaun Watson's been awful so far this season, but this actually wasn't a terrible Deshaun Watson game. He actually played halfway decent, but then everyone else was like, oh, okay, we're the Browns, so we need to compensate. If he's going to play okay, so we need to figure out other. So like the line was really bad. Amari Cooper like dropping a very easy catch that somehow turns into an interception, and like there's just like all that kind of stuff where you're like, what is happening?
No, it was the old school finding ways to lose type of game.
Yeah,
and they
very creative.
Yep, they are very good at it and creative at it. So
stealing defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah. So let's not get too much off the rails here in this sad realm of the Browns. Let's get on to some injuries, right? Some good news.
Let's do it.
Injuries.
Yeah, right, so something we're so much more excited about.
All right, so let's start with the first one. We talked last week about what was it, cooked or not cooked or whatever, and we talked about a lot of the guys on Indy, whether they're cooked or not, and I said directly, I feel like I jinxed this one. So Anthony Richardson goes out with a hip pointer, and in comes Joe Flacco. So my dude
slanging it.
Yeah, exactly. Slinging it. Everyone's values in the wide receiver core just went right up, exactly like I said they would if Joe Flacco was in. Unfortunately, for all the shares of Michael Pittman Jr. that I have, this seems to be a very short-term type of thing. Yeah. They're not believing that there's going to be any sort of long-term issue. It's a hip pointer, so it's going to be a pain tolerance type of thing. He just couldn't get through that game.
Wasn't that play directly after he left the game, and then they run it was either an RPO or a direct like quarterback run, and like what are we doing here? What your dude just came out.
Are you kidding? That? They're trying to win the game. They got to get Anthony Richardson out of there so they could get Flacco slanging the ball around so they could beat the Steelers, and it worked. That coaching staff is genius, man. Are you kidding me?
It was something special for sure. But yeah, like you mentioned, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a long-term thing. Maybe he misses one more week at most, but it sounds like he could have even come back in if they really needed him to. So I'm not over, like if I have Anthony Richardson, and chances are you're starting him in Superflex if you have Anthony Richardson. It's not at that point where you're benching him necessarily. He'll more than likely be back sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But I texted it out to the whole group as soon as he got injured. I just wrote consistability, and
that's right.
So, I mean, this is just another ding. It's kind of another
Yeah.
a red flag that goes up for Anthony Richardson and his injury history, because he doesn't seem to know how to take a hit well, right? It seems like every
No.
time he's taking hits, he's taking bone crunching hits. So,
Yeah.
just another thing to file away in your in the back of your mind, I guess, for Anthony Richardson. If you either have him and maybe there's a time where he peaks and looks really good, maybe if
Mhm.
you're really worried about the injuries, which I'm starting to become, maybe it's
Yeah.
a sell
I think
high
it's fair.
time. Yeah. And if you're thinking about maybe making a move for him, maybe take notes of these things and maybe don't make the move for him if you're risk averse. So
Yeah.
that's
Absolutely.
all I got to say about that one. You got any final words before we move on to running backs?
Now let's get to Jonathan Taylor.
All right, yeah, let's move on. Sticking with the Indianapolis Colts, we're going to go to Jonathan Taylor, who missed the game or missed the end of the game there with an ankle sprain. It sounds like this one is a high ankle sprain, but a mild version of a high ankle sprain.
Yeah.
Anything you got? Any thoughts you got on this one?
Well, watching, I had two games on. I had Red Zone on, and then I had the Steelers Colts game on at the same time. So I was watching every play of that game, and they kept panning to him on the sideline, and he was jogging and doing ladder type stuff, and you could tell it was another one where like he probably could have gone. This was a playoff game or something like that? Like he's probably back out there. They decided to play it safe. Keep him on the sideline, which I was a little surprised because you do get towards the end of games there and you're trying to run out the clock. Jonathan Taylor's the ideal run the clock out type running back. So that wasn't super great. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up, we want to give him a week to get this thing right. So maybe we miss him for a week, but this doesn't seem like the kind where we're going to be missing him for 3 weeks or short-term IR or something like that. Like it seems like we're going to kind of keep hearing about it for the next 2 to 3 weeks, and it'll be those game time decision kind of things.
Yeah, I agree. I think ankles are one of those weird things where when you injure it, it can almost be
Can
okay to
linger.
get. Yeah, it can get through a game. Like you can be okay, and then afterwards you
Yeah.
take everything off, everything swells up, and it's kind of a little bit more difficult, and it is a little bit worse than you had thought. So I know the initial things are, hey, this is mild. It's still a high ankle sprain. I would expect him to miss a game, but just keep an eye on the practice reports this week. If he miraculously practices on Friday, I mean, I think that's a good sign that Sunday he might be headed in the right direction. If not, I would expect him to miss a week at the very
No.
least, even if it's a mild high ankle sprain. So
Yep.
obviously Trey
Yep.
Sermon
That
is the
sounds right.
guy. Yeah, Trey Sermon is the guy that came in the game and was the immediate backup. Wasn't super effective, 5 carries, 8 yards, but we have seen him do some good things and make some good runs, kind of as a spot duty type of guy. So if Jonathan Taylor isn't there, it's basically Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson. So I would expect Sermon to kind of be the guy that carries the load if there is any sort of absence for Jonathan Taylor.
Agreed.
Um, so moving on to the next injured running back, Tyler Badie, who
Apparently, I always thought it was Badie.
it was always Badie. We always announced him as Badie. We always talked about him as Badie, but they were talking about it on the Red Zone channel, and there has been a correction sent out that it is Badie.
Apparently, he's a water toilet.
That is all I can think of now is a water toilet. But he left the game, and he had been emerging as kind of a guy that was stealing carries from Javonte
Mm-hmm.
Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin. So this is kind of an unfortunate turn of events for this young running back. I think he's third year in from Missouri, but he was
Yep.
actually backboarded off to the
On the
locker
sideline.
room. No, he was able to get off the field, I think, but then it
Right.
was
He
like,
made it to the sideline,
and then
and
from
then
the
all
side,
this happened.
yeah, from the sideline, he was then like backboarded and carted to the locker room. So it sounds like a fairly serious back injury. The news did come out today that he has movement in all his extremities, his arms, his legs, and everything. So that's good news. Anytime you're backboarded, that's always a
Yeah.
concern that it was something much more major and could be a long-term effect, but it sounds like that's not the case. But IR is still pretty likely, I think, at this point,
I,
if you're getting carted off and all that kind of stuff.
I would agree. This doesn't have a huge fantasy impact necessarily, although if there was going to be somebody that stole carries from my beloved Javonte, he was a kid that I did like, and we actually gave a decent nerd score to because I thought he had really good tape. It was just always a size thing with him, but had monster numbers at Missouri. But if anything, this helps for fantasy football because it's just less mouths to feed in the backfield. And 1 week after saying he's cooked, now still wasn't the most amazing fantasy game, but Javonte did put up 77 rushing yards in this game. So it was a sign-ish that maybe things are turning around. I still have such a low confidence level, but at least it's less mouths to feed.
Yeah, totally agree, man. It was, 16 carries, 77 yards for Javonte Williams, which is, to me, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
So, and he had a couple of catches in the game as well for very minimal yards, 3 yards, 2 catches. But double-digit points, 10 points on the nose.
We'll take it.
So it's going in the right direction, I think, for Javonte anyway. There's that. It's something to hang your hat on anyway. Another one that's kind of, I just wanted to mention it, not very fantasy relevant, but Cordarrelle Patterson did go out with an ankle in this past week's game. More fantasy or more real football, I guess, impact than fantasy football impact. No one's really starting Cordarrelle at this point. So that's it for the running back position. We're going to move on to the wide receivers and kind of start with there's some big names in this group.
There are.
First one, rookie sensation Malik Nabers played on Thursday night. Had a nice game, but ended up with a concussion. So obviously the good news here, it was Thursday night that they played on.
It was a Thursday. Yep.
So there's a little bit of extra time for them to kind of get him through all the protocol. It's still going to be kind of up against it as to whether or not he'll be able to play this week. So I get, obviously just anyone that has Malik and is hoping to start him, which if you have him, I'm guessing you're hoping to start him.
You're starting him, yep.
Yeah. Just keep an eye on those reports, see how that is coming along. Obviously, if he's cleared, concussions, if you get through all that protocol, guys are usually 100% fine the next, whatever week they start. So put him in your lineup with confidence. But other than that, it's Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt. Hyatt would get a little bit of a bump if he's out. One of those guys.
It is a tough one too, because would you how much would you expect of that monster target share that Malik Nabers gets? What's it, like 37% or something like that? How much of that goes to the backup receiver, and then how much of that goes to Wan'Dale Robinson or the tight end? Or because that's the hard part with Wan'Dale is he can only take so many more targets because it's basically a two-man show. If the ball doesn't go to Nabers, it goes to Wan'Dale. If it doesn't go to Wan'Dale, it goes to Nabers. So where would we expect if he misses a game? Is there anyone that can kind of capitalize on that, or not really?
And it's hard to imagine many more balls going to Wan'Dale, like, to your point. So I do think it would have to be spread around. Maybe they'd get the tight ends a little bit more involved. They don't seem to target them with a lot of frequency. This past week, Theo Johnson got 1 target.
Right.
So, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot going on there. So I would expect, the slack to get picked up by a lot of these guys. I think Hyatt is a guy that has some skills and is kind of disgruntled a little bit there and kind of wishing his role was bigger. But I think Darius Slayton is probably the more likely guy to get more targets, while Hyatt would be the guy kind of still stretching the field. So I think they can get it done still. But if I would put my money on one of those two guys, I'd say Slayton gets a bump in targets over Hyatt.
That makes sense to me. Let's move to definitely, without a doubt, the biggest injury conversation of the week, and Rashee Rice. Like, that's a tough blow for a guy that was just having a huge season.
Yeah, he was having a monster year, and obviously the way it happened too is such a bummer. I mean, it's on an interception return basically, and his own quarterback is trying to make the tackle and takes out his knee. That stinks. But yeah, I mean, all the early reports are this looks like an ACL tear. Obviously, the MRI today will confirm it. I haven't heard anything as of when
I
we're
haven't yet either.
making this show here, so I don't know for sure. But either way, I would expect this to be some bad news. I think ACL tears usually those people that work on the players on the sideline can tell there's an instability issue and that something's torn in there. It's usually just a confirmation with an MRI. So I would expect this to be an ACL and him to miss the rest of the season, unfortunately. So, I mean, it's a huge blow. Obviously, direct backups, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman. Those are all the wide receivers. I would imagine this is a pretty nice bump for Travis Kelce, though,
Yep.
because they both work the middle of the field quite well. So I would think, a combination of a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster maybe getting more targets than he has been getting and more usage in this offense, and really mostly a bump in Travis Kelce's value out of this unfortunate news for Rashee Rice.
Totally agree. And we kind of already saw it going that way right away in the first game back. 15.9 fantasy points for Travis Kelce, far and away the best game that he's had so far this season. A lot more targets, a lot more looks. So this in a year where tight end has been absolutely brutal. I mean, we got another 0-point game from Mark Andrews. We got a 0-point game from Kyle Pitts. We've got relatively low numbers from Dalton Kincaid and like just so many guys where you're just like, wow, this is rough. This is not going well. We could see what was it in Game of Thrones? What's dead may never die. Like this could be one of those situations where, oh, Travis Kelce, tight end 1 again. Here it is. Because there's nobody that he's really like fighting for at this point. Like even Brock Bowers, who started the season off well, 2 games in a row below 10 points. Like there's no consistent option at the tight end position at the moment. And like at this point, if I was a betting man, I would say Travis Kelce finishes the season as tight end 1 because Pacheco's out and Rice is out, and he's going to be the focal point of the offense.
He absolutely is. So I think this is going to continue to grow for him. So the patient people that had Travis Kelce and didn't panic through 3 weeks might be nicely rewarded, I think, going forward. So I agree. He's going to be up there. If he's not the number 1 guy, he's still going to be a difference maker at that position and top 3 at the very least in my eyes. So I think it's definitely going to be another good season for Travis.
Real quick before we move on to the next one, because the next one's got a little bit to talk about, and then the last 2 not much, but for Rice, let's say you're a rebuilding team. What would you be willing to give for a guy like Rashee Rice, knowing that, yeah, he's going to be coming off this injury and there could still be some legal things hanging out there, but we know talent and opportunity, when those come together for him, he's legitimately like a top 5 dynasty receiver type. So like, what would you be willing to pay for a contending team? Like, let's say you had an older wide receiver that, you're going to pair up with a pick or something like that. Like, what would you be willing to give?
That's a tough one. I'm trying to think of who I like.
So let's say you had Mike Evans. And
Mike Evans ascending. Or Mike Williams. How about Mike Williams ascending?
And Mike Williams, yeah.
Mike Williams ascending and doing better week by week.
I love how I say Mike and you just assume it's Williams.
In my brain, I was just like, Mike Williams. He's got to be talking about Mike Williams. It's me. Mike Evans similarly had a nice week this week as well. So either one of those guys. If it was Evans, I mean, obviously, it'd be like Mike Evans in a second, maybe. I wouldn't do much more than that.
So you wouldn't give Evans in a first for Rashee Rice in a rebuild? Assuming it's not your own first. Like your own first, probably not. But if you had multiple firsts where you have a later one, like would you do that?
If it was a later first, for sure. That's why I said second, just assuming it was my own and I'm a rebuild and I don't want to give up my own first round draft pick.
Right.
For Rashee Rice, I would rather just hold on to him. I'd rather hold on to the pick than pick Rashee Rice, who has some baggage and now an ACL tear. But I would feel okay giving an early second, which would be my own second, and a guy like Evans or Williams for that matter. You might have to give a little bit more if you're sending Mike Williams. Maybe a second and a third. I don't know. Something like that.
Just tiny.
Just something small.
Okay, yeah. I think I would be willing to do Evans in a late first for Rice. And that might get it done. It might not, depending on the owner, how serious they are about contending this year, that kind of thing. But you do see that, especially the closer you get to trade deadline. It's like, this guy's not going to help me. I need to win a ship. Like, my window's closing. I'll give you this guy that's on my IR for a player that can help me win now. And so
that's you might even be able to just get it done if the person is desperate enough. With just a Mike Evans and something even less than a second, if it gets close enough to that deadline. And they're really looking for points if they know bye weeks are coming or something. You know what I mean? Like, it all really depends on the league and how desperate that person is to. Maybe they're trying to go for a third ship in a row and they don't really give a crap about this team after that. They know it's going to blow up soon anyway, so they just need points this year. Some people really do get that mentality if they're going for something special. So who knows? Right. Moving on to the next one here, Christian Watson went down with a ankle injury as well. This is believed to be the old high ankle sprain. Also, so Dontavius Wicks was the most immediate guy that got a big boost. I think he was second on the team in targets behind Romeo Doubs.
The Doubs ended up having the most.
I think it was Doubs and then Wicks, who had a nice game, obviously, a couple touchdowns.
He could have had even a nicer game. He had like a couple big drops and stuff too. Like, he could have had another worldly game, but that's always been Wicks. Like, that's always been his game. He's kind of that MVS type where big plays, but also a lot of like, what did you do there?
Totally agree. That's why I didn't love the guy coming out. I think he's got good movement skills. His hands are just a little bit too unreliable. It doesn't seem to matter much there for Green Bay. They just kind of keep throwing him the ball and live with the few drops that he has because he is able to make some big plays. So
and they were down quite a bit, and they were chucking, just trying to get back in the game.
Absolutely, and they almost did it. They lost 29-31.
It was close.
Yeah, not quite enough. I would expect. It looks like Wicks got the most targets. I'm sorry, I don't know where I read that he got the second most. He got the most. He had 13 targets.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then it was Tucker, the tight end, and then the two Jaden Reed and Doubs.
Okay.
Wherever I read that, it was bad info. But Wicks got 13 targets. He led the team. Only had 5 receptions, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. But I would expect him to get the majority of the work kind of while Christian Watson is out. Maybe some Bo Melton gets mixed in as well. As kind of a fourth option behind those other people.
Sure.
But from a fantasy perspective, I feel like it's, if you got Wicks, you feel better about starting him going forward.
Yeah.
But it also could be Jaden Reed to the moon. Who knows?
Could
you
be.
Know what I mean?
Or it could be a Tucker Kraft week or a Romeo Doubs week or that's the tough one with this offense.
It really is. So I don't know. I don't have much more on this one. Christian Watson, another little nagging injury. I feel like he's good for.
We've almost gotten more used to him being out than in.
Agreed.
So it's not much of like an adjustment for people. Like, you're just kind of used to this, and this is how it works in Green Bay.
This is going to be his 5-game stretch that he misses this year. If not, this could be one of 2. This could be one of 3. Who knows? So Christian Watson,
it's unfortunate, but yeah,
it really is. So moving on to the next one here, Trey Palmer having a nice little game with McMillan being out. Unfortunately, he has a concussion in this game. So Trey Palmer for the Tampa Bay Bucks. I don't know if there's much of a fantasy impact here because he's really just the third guy there at best. So really, if McMillan comes back, there's no impact, and it's just McMillan kind of sliding right back into that. If not, maybe Sterling Shepard gets a bump, but either way, you're not starting Sterling Shepard with any sort of confidence. We could probably move on. Just a bummer that Trey Palmer, who was getting pushed into action and having a good day, kind of his day ends with a concussion, and he'll probably miss a little bit of time, maybe a week of action or something. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to tight ends. The only big news here is Taysom Hill, and he was out in week 2, out in week 3, came back for week 4. He was out with a chest he was out with a chest injury. He's running all over the place like a madman. Now he's got a rib injury. They're saying it's to the other side of his body. It's not a re-injury of the other chest injury. So this dude's just getting beat up. They use him like a battering ram, so it doesn't surprise me. Yep. He's not a tight end. I don't know what position he plays. It's not tight end.
He plays football. That's what he plays.
Yeah, he plays running back. He plays quarterback. He plays, I don't know. I guess sometimes he'll catch a pass, but it's more of a running back than it is anything else. So
and he's also 32 years old. Like, he's not a young pup anymore. Like, he's an older guy. So I don't expect this to change anytime soon. Taysom is a guy that you never knew when to put in your lineup, never knew when to start. I ranked him as a top 12 guy this year with like confidence that he'll probably somehow figure out how to get there because of these 2 touchdown games and things like this. But you never know what 4 or 5 games that year to start him, because one week it's a Taysom Hill week and the next week it's not a Taysom Hill week, and he's getting it's always been inconsistent. It's always been weird. More of a best ball thing, maybe more than anything else, where he's a fun guy to have in those formats because sometimes you get that extra little boost of production. But in real leagues, almost nobody would start him outside of a desperation start.
No doubt. And he was tight end 5 this week in PPR.
Yep.
just to give it some context to your conversation there. Obviously, there's no true backup for this guy. I mean, the other tight ends on the roster aren't the same as him, so it's Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau, but it's not like you can now start
Spencer Rattler his backup. Like is Kendre Miller his backup? Like, I don't know.
I have no idea, but he's listed as a tight end, so I said the tight ends, but they're not going to see like an extra boost because he's gone, because they don't throw passes.
Is there a safety that's his backup? I don't know. Like,
who knows, man? You know, they should bring in Leonard Fournette. I feel like that would be the 1-for-1 replacement.
The only real versatile player like that. That's right. Oh, man. All right. Well, that wraps up all the injuries this week. Obviously, good news that we only have one long-term injury. So that's good news. But obviously, it definitely was one that hurt our fantasy football team. So any other thoughts before we wrap things up here, Matt?
No, I mean, obviously, if there are any injuries that happen on Monday night, we will cover them on the regular show and kind of do a quick rundown of those. So just keep an eye out for that if there are any Monday issues or injuries.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back with all of our regularly scheduled programming, both podcasts, Nerd Herd Show, all the YouTube stuff. If you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, please make sure that you do so. And we will see you guys next week.
Adios.